الأخوة والأخوات الكرام، أرحب بكم في هذه الجلسة.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome you in this session that will be focusing on Gulf security in a changing environment, and we would like to thank the organizers of this forum and for having chosen such important topics. The concept of Gulf security is witnessing a very big transformations, and in fact there are lots of international events as well, and events in the region. And here we can say that after the blockade on Qatar, the situation has changed a little bit, and the region is witnessing the race of armament that affects negatively the budget. In addition to this, oil prices decreased. So the states in the region are starting to have different positions from each others. The last American escalation added a new dimension and increased tensions in the region, and Gulf states found themselves in a difficult situation, facing difficult choices. So there are some Gulf countries that have deep neighboring countries, good relations with Iran. The United States of America is also seeking to form a security military coalition that takes different seas into consideration. And to this alliance, KSA, UAE, Bahrain, they joined them, and Bahrain did not join that and considered that this development will increase the tensions in the region. Qatar, Kuwait, and Oman prefer the policy of dialogue and diplomacy. So what are the details of the Kuwaiti and Omani positions? This session will shed the light on the papers of Dhafer and Noof Al-Dosari through Skype. They will be talking about the Omani-Kuwaiti interaction and about the policy of Oman towards Iran. In addition to this, the last confrontations in the Gulf raised an important question about the defense system and about the developed armament arsenal. In order to answer these questions, we will start with our first speaker, Dr. Dhafer Al-Ajmi, who will be talking about Gulf security, the absence of the Gulf Naval Force. Dr. Dhafer is the executive director and he is also an ex-member of the Kuwaiti forces. He has lots of publications like the security of the Arab Gulf and the history of the Kuwaiti army from 2004 till 2011, in addition to many others as well. Dr. Dhafer Al-Ajmi, you have 15 minutes. Thank you very much. In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful, thank you very much for your presentation, for having introduced me actually. I would like to talk about Gulf security, especially the absence of the Gulf Naval Force, and leaving this to someone else. The Arab Gulf brought these fleets. The Arab Gulf is our road to the world, is our channel to the world, is our resources that we export. So in June of last year, I was invited by the CMF, which is the coalition of the Maritime Force, and the 5th American Fleet. They invited me to hold a presentation in Bahrain about the Gulf security after the tension between the Americans and Iran. And while I was presenting, I wanted to transfer a message to them and to say that we are feeling that there is a fake security actually. So it's like there's a false sense of security, and we are not talking about real security. So you are not providing us with real security. And I was really frustrated, and I was attacking NATO on this day more than Americans. In the hall there were 100 people from the naval force. Their response was a bit strict. We took a break for 10 minutes, and during these 10 breaks the ships in the Gulf were attacked. So I was very lucky that I showed them that we are really feeling a false sense of security, because look at how these ships were attacked without the naval force that is really big in the Arab Gulf, without it being able to stop it. So when I came back from the break, I told them I rest my case. This is what happened, and the incident really summarizes what we are feeling. Today I will be talking about the Gulf Naval Force and the naval structures, the foreign naval forces in the Arab Gulf. And what about the Gulf Naval Force, and how does it look at this structure? Of course, this Arab Gulf, as you see, I showed you the Arab Gulf as you saw on the slide. And if we take into consideration the theory of Alfred Mahan, he said that glory is to the naval force, the world will develop, but then later on it will go back to the same point, that the sea and the naval force will move everything. However, now there's a new code that is being adopted, and it's focusing on the local naval force and on the importance of the local naval force, which means that there's no importance to, for example, aircraft carriers, because there are drones, there are ballistic missiles, there are cruise missiles, and so on. I do believe that this mentality will not carry on a lot. This is a strategic lack of thinking, because of course the sea constitutes a way and a manner, but the force is not in the sea. It's the bases that are in the sea. The third point is the following: the United States of America is still depending on the naval force as the efficient aspect in its force in order to control or to protect its interests. My question is the following: how does all of that affect the Arab Gulf? As you see on this map, you can look at the movement, maritime movement on one day in the Arab Gulf. Technology, telecommunications, all of these things, they're not devalue the Arab Gulf. Here we're talking about military ships, about commercial ships, about naval ships. So 451 miles are miles of crises, depending on who is benefiting from this Gulf. Now, in what concerns the maritime military structures, there are many in the Arab Gulf. As I said earlier, there are no honest and clear agreements in what concerns the existence of these structures. Some enter in order to say, for example, that they will transport oil, others that they will focus on trade. Pretexts are many and structures are many. The Gulf maritime structures are present. Dr. Abdullah Al-Shayji a while ago talked about the absence of the Gulf Naval Force. It is existent, but why do not we see it? Why can't we see military actions? For a very clear for a very clear reason, because this is something that is secretive. We do not tell the whole world about our military secrets, or actually about our military actions, because there's a lot of information that can be leaked. We cannot just talk about everything what concerns the military activities. Some say that do not know about the group 81. They have been established for 5 years, and they unify the GCC countries, and despite the current crisis, this did not stop. In addition to this, there are also common and shared drills that did not stop. We know that Qatari officials participate in all drills and in all military drills since the establishment of the GCC and until today. And they come to Kuwait, and then they go elsewhere, and all meetings are still happening. So of course the force is still there. The military force is still there. When I talk about the Gulf Naval Force, the Gulf Maritime Force, what do we have? We have a Gulf Maritime Force that is really important if we compare it to structures or to other world entities. The Gulf Naval Force, as you see, is at the 50th rank in what concerns the measurement of the world or global Gulf Naval Force. The UAE is at the 33rd rank, the Omani at the 88th rank, and so on. The 31st in what concerns the Qatari, the Kuwaiti 80, actually the 7th in what concerns the region, and 63rd rank at the level of the region, the world. As I said earlier, there's the 5th American fleet. It is the biggest maritime entity here, and it has to protect ships. However, this does not neutralize the Gulf efforts. The 5th American fleet and Abraham Lincoln or actually, in the crisis, we see that some inspectors are sent in order to look at the tools used to commit a crime by Iranians, if you know what I mean. So there are certain interests, American interests, to be taken into account. When North Korea launched ballistic missiles above South Korea and Japan to reach the Sea of Japan or the Sea of China, South Korea and the Japanese asked the Americans, why did you not stop this missile? There was a technical and a political answer. So they said that it was too high, and therefore we were incapable of really stopping and intercepting this missile. Regarding the political answer or response, they said that this does not constitute any danger to the American interests. If this had happened when Aramco had been attacked, or actually when Aramco was attacked, why certain things were not mentioned, especially when we talked about the command and control and communication centers. They are found from the north to the south. Why weren't we informed about these missiles? Because this is not in the American interests. The American presence, you can see it here on the map on the slide before you. So in what concerns the latest American efforts, we can talk about the common force of the Gulf security, and it is an extension of Operation Sentinel. Here you can see the chart from the year 2007 that shows the importance of the Gulf and the partners participating in importing their merchandise, and where they go to in the Arab Gulf, and why are they protected by the Americans through this Operation Sentinel. Of course, Operation Sentinel was renewed, and these are the countries that joined last month. They started an exercise and they also specified the geographic location of this drill or this military drill, and the Red Sea was ignored despite the fact that it is an Arabian lake, a western wing. So it's like you left a point from which the danger can come and affect the Arab Gulf. So there is, I think that this operation lacked many important things. There is also the combined maritime forces, and they have been present since the year 2000. They are present in 3 places in the Indian Ocean and Bab al-Mandeb, and there are 33 countries that participate in that. Beforehand, Abdullah Al-Sheji said there are no Gulf forces, so there are 6 countries among the 33 countries that take care of the leadership of these forces. The Gulf countries are the one leading the 33rd countries. The last 2 official leaders were Kuwaitis. And in addition to this, we can say that in the last crisis, we also saw and we also witnessed a Zionist maritime structure in the Gulf, and this is something that is important. It's like an attempt to stop Iran, and maybe we can look at it this way. However, and until today, nothing happened. The Israeli governments, from one government to another, did not adopt anything in what concerns this. The Russian maritime structures are found in Irani Baluchistan. So the Russians, in my opinion, are not clear, especially in what concerns their initiatives. And it's like they are working based on an Iranian plan. And the third point, and it's the most important point, is that they are really going back 20 years, despite the fact that we are in need of an instantaneous solution now in order to put an end to the dilemma of Gulf security. So we can talk about a Chinese rapprochement, a Japanese rapprochement, a Russian rapprochement, but everything is related to the Silk Road, and the Japanese focus a lot on the protection of their ships. I have conclusions, if time allows me to present them and share them with you. So before talking about these conclusions, I would like to talk about the Irani maritime force. So it's like the enemy of everybody, whether we are talking about the Gulf or the Americans. There are 2 types of the Irani maritime force. First, the one who owns the submarines, and the second part of the Revolutionary Guard. It uses the swarm technique, and this is the theory of small insects and how they can attack a big animal. So this is the combat doctrine, if I may say, and it's very weird that we read about this principle, that it emanated from the laboratories of the U.S. Marine Corps, and the experts of the U.S. Marine Corps put small animals and big animals together and see how they interact with each other, how they attack each other, and they implement this on the field. So how can small units really destroy bigger units using techniques that are not actually used a lot? The U.S. Maritime Force is now obliged to change its combat doctrine. So it's important to say here that entering an aircraft carrier would not be beneficial in the face of Iran, or in order to face Iran. And now there's also another form of Iranian naval or maritime force. Because we can talk about the strategic supplements of Iran. Hezbollah are being trained in Syria. Hezbollah are being trained everywhere, and they are training the Houthis. They have a naval force. They burnt an Israeli military ship, and afterwards Hezbollah is proud of its naval force. There are also the popular front forces of Iraq. They use techniques similar to those of the Revolutionary Guard. However, what is worrisome to us is that Iraq does not have a sea, so where will this force go? And now I would like to talk about the Houthi forces. They are very efficient maritime forces. They were very efficient in what concerns facing, for example, the ships of the coalition, and they use different techniques in order to do that. And now please allow me to share my final conclusions. The naval force did not get a lot of importance in what concerns the GCC, so it's like the lost battle in what concerns the GCC. I think that's very important for us to constitute a part of the efforts that will complement the efforts of the US. Of course, we cannot depend on America all the time. However, it's very important for us to be logical and to cooperate with these different naval forces. And the Gulf Naval Force also should develop many aspects that are related to it. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you, Dr. Dhafer, for having shed the light on all of these things linked to the Gulf Naval Force, for the numbers you gave us, for the data you gave us. And now we would like to move to the other session, actually to the other speaker. Of course, now we would like to move to the other speaker, who is working a researcher at the Center of Analytics of the Gulf States in Washington. It is a center that focuses on strategic and security studies, focusing on Gulf states. He focuses in his studies on diplomacy, on governance, on the security in the Arab Gulf and Yemen. You may take the floor, Mr. Parker. Thank you very much, Zenan. Thank you for the Arab Center for having given me this opportunity. I would like to carry on my intervention in English.
Since 1981, the GCC's desire for coordination, cooperation, and integration in all fields has been strained as the group's 5 small monarchies confront the hegemonic aims of Saudi Arabia. Geopolitical circumstances of the past decade have magnified members' divergent threat perceptions, incongruent diplomatic priorities, and competitive developmental goals into what are strategic differences that imperil the Arab Gulf states' ambition for integration. These differences have trifurcated the GCC. In one block is Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain, which currently blockade Qatar. Since the June 5, 2017 action, Qatar has become more resilient, representing a block of its own. In the third are Oman and Kuwait. They comprise a third camp which avoid the blockade, striving for a middle ground between the bandwagoning behavior of the UAE and Bahrain and the balancing actions of Qatar. As the other small Gulf states pursue deference toward or defiance of Saudi Arabia, this paper explores the question, how do Oman and Kuwait retain a flexible statecraft? The Sultanate of Oman and the state of Kuwait prevent Saudi control while also avoiding its ire through the strategic approach of hedging. This paper argues that Oman and Kuwait prevent the risks of entanglement found in bandwagoning, the escalation inherent to balancing, and the isolation of neutrality by pursuing a hedging strategy of with and against tactics with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has accelerated its push for hegemony over the GCC since 2010. Militarily, its officials have called for a unified military force. Politically, it has escalated tensions with Iran, and economically, it called for a unified GCC currency and bank to be headquartered in Riyadh. Saudi's decade of an increasingly assertive foreign policy has yielded three alignment behaviors within the GCC. First, the UAE and Bahrain have bandwagoned with Saudi Arabia, not as a form of appeasement to a threat, but as for the opportunity for gain from partnership. They seek to influence Saudi Arabia, though this approach can cause entrapment and loss of strategic autonomy. Sensing this, the UAE has since retrenched its forces from Yemen and has begun talks with Iran beginning in midsummer. Second, Qatar has balanced against Saudi Arabia, both in the hard sense of strengthening its own military capabilities and hosting international forces, and the soft sense of contravening Saudi through robust relations with Iran. While this balancing may subside upon resolution of the Gulf crisis, Qatar has become more autonomous. Third, Oman and Kuwait carry out hedging, which Jean-Marc Rickley and Khaled al-Mazaini define as bandwagoning with a regional power while balancing through a bilateral alliance with the hegemon or the superpowers in the international system or with the regional powers' adversaries. Cheng Chi Kwek offers a rich explanation for small state hedging. For Kwek, hedging is quote-unquote an insurance-seeking behavior under high stakes and high uncertainty situations where a sovereign actor pursues a bundle of opposite and deliberately ambiguous policies vis-a-vis competing powers to prepare a fallback position should circumstances change. Hedging involves 6 tactics. First, return maximizing tactics bridge neutrality and bandwagoning. These include limited bandwagoning, where states forge a partnership with a big power through selective deference or selective collaboration without accepting a subordinate position. Second, binding engagement that creates channels of and increasing the status quo tendency of the power's behavior. And then third is economic pragmatism to maximize economic returns from the power. Second, we have the risk contingency tactics, which bridge neutrality and balancing. In terms of security, indirect balancing offers a military hedge wherein states cultivate defensive partnerships. Diplomatically, there's dominance denial, where non-military means are used to cultivate a balance of interest. And then finally, economic diversification, which involves diversification away from the primary partner. I now turn to description and analysis of the Sultanate of Oman. Oman exhibits a sociocultural ethos akin to the Indian Ocean nations. Oman shows how global commercial ties, pluralistic Islam, and streamlined leadership under Sultan Qaboos bin Sa'id al-Sa'id promotes congenial ties with all states. As the Ministry of Foreign Affairs proclaims, the diplomatic rhythm of Oman is keen now and in the future to establish friendly relations with the entire world. Oman has worked to promote good and equal relations with other countries and to adopt a policy of good neighborliness. Oman hedges Saudi Arabia through 2 actions. With return maximizing behavior, Oman understands that selective cooperation with Saudi Arabia and some acceptance of its initiatives functions to placate Saudi officials and signals Oman's commitment to the GCC. Abdullah Ba'aboud's characterization of Oman's foreign policy as positive neutrality reflects its aims for regional security and cooperation. Limited bandwagoning is the first facet of Oman's return maximizing behavior. In particular, it joined the Saudi Islamic military alliance to fight terrorism in December 2016, the last state to do so, and endorsed the U.S.-led MESA, as we alluded to, in 2018. Oman's commitment to these remained nominal and largely symbolic to avoid entanglement. However, acknowledgement of their existence does signal partnership with Saudi Arabia. Oman's binding engagement with Saudi lies in its adherence to the institutional integrity of the Gulf Cooperation Council. The clearest example of this was Oman's decision to allow Riyadh to host the 39th GCC summit in 2018, as opposed to Oman's scheduled rotation. Oman also pursues economic pragmatism in its financial ties with Saudi Arabia. Unlike Bahrain, which is literally and figuratively connected to the Saudi economy, Oman resists over-reliance on the economic giant. However, it did take a contribution of $210 million for development of Duqm port. Oman has found it prudent to complement these positive links to Saudi Arabia with the tactics of negative neutrality embodied in risk contingency behaviors. Militarily, Oman pursues an indirect balancing that seeks preservation of a complex balance of power in the Gulf. Oman rejected Saudi's suggestion for a full GCC union in 2013 and was the only GCC state not to intervene in Yemen on March 26, 2015's Operation Decisive Storm. It also conducts naval patrols with Iranian forces and signed a strategic agreement with the U.S. in March 2019 over the ports of Sahar and Salalah, if I'm not mistaken. Dominance denial is the core political means through which Oman hedges. First, Oman's insistence on keeping diplomatic relations with Iran, even after the 1979 resolution, allows it to orchestrate U.S.-Iran dialogue. Second, Oman announced in late June its plans to open an embassy in the Palestinian territories. Finally, Oman has kept open channels with Ansar Allah, the Houthis, which operate in northern Yemen, and as of mid-2019 facilitates negotiations between Houthi officials and Saudi representatives. Oman capitalizes on its location to enhance economic diversification. It has turned to Asia, Chinese and Indian investors in particular, for development of its port city Sahar and Duqm, and has a pending gas pipeline with Iran. These security, political, and economic tactics drive Oman's hedging. Militarily, Oman has avoided entanglement in Saudi Arabia's interventions by coordinating with Iran tactically and the U.S. strategically. Diplomatically, Oman has shuttled between regional capitals to tackle disagreements. Economically, Oman has leveraged its strategic location for foreign investment, which lies outside of the Strait of Hormuz. Kuwait also pursues a diverse range of tactics to hedge Saudi Arabia. The state of Kuwait is a small nation which has long played an outsized role in the Gulf. Its precarious geographic location, contentious domestic politics, and steadfast leadership under Emir Sabah al-Ahmed al-Jabbar al-Sabah have placed it at the epicenter of Gulf affairs since independence in 1961. As Emir Sabah proclaimed in 2016, Kuwait is a state of stability, vision, and sustainability. With increasing regional instability, Kuwait remains a secure and stable country where its people enjoy freedom and compassion. Located between the Gulf's belligerent giants, Kuwait has prioritized a benevolent and nimble statecraft. Through returns maximizing behavior, Kuwait participates in Saudi security ventures cautiously, works with its larger neighbors through the auspices of the GCC, and maintains sound commercial relations with Saudi Arabia. Limited bandwagoning is the key aspect of Kuwait's security relationship towards Saudi Arabia. It merely sent a naval detachment to Bahrain in 2011, seeking to avoid discontent among some of its Shia servicemen. It also has had a relatively light footprint in the intervention in Yemen compared to other coalition members, such as Sudan's 10,000 troops as of October and the Emirates' much larger presence. Unlike Oman, though, Kuwait has demonstrated a tangible commitment to Saudi security goals without compromising strategic autonomy. Kuwait pursues binding engagement with Saudi Arabia through the GCC. It has been an active shuttle diplomat to bring the Gulf crisis to the end, as it did the 8-month diplomatic row in 2014. Emir Sabah voiced his frustration with the crisis, stating in October, "It is no longer acceptable nor tolerable to have an ongoing dispute among our brotherly GCC states. It has weakened our capabilities and undermined our gains." Finally, Kuwait uses economic pragmatism in its commercial links to Saudi Arabia. Not only does it have strong import and export relations with Saudi, but there's also been an announcement that drilling will resume in their neutral oil zone, which was postponed or stalled in September 2018. Kuwait stakes its survival on preserving security latitude, fostering diplomatic goodwill, and pursuing economic stability. With all these actions, Kuwait has sought risk contingency against Saudi Arabia in its active and interventionist foreign policy, especially under Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Kuwait's military hedge involves indirect balancing with U.S. protection. Kuwait's greatest security asset is its basing of some 16,000 forces of the U.S. in Camp Al-Ajmi, thank you, of which it is a major non-NATO ally, along with Bahrain being the other GCC state. Likewise, it has strong ties to NATO through the Istanbul Cooperation Initiative, onto which it signed in 2014. Dominance denial is Kuwait's political hedge against Saudi Arabia. This effort is clear in Kuwait's support of Palestine. Unlike other GCC states, Kuwait has shunned rapprochement with Israel and normalization with what its diplomats termed the occupying power over the Palestinians. It also boycotted, or shall I say, did not attend, the Peace for Prosperity conference held in Bahrain earlier this year and expressed concern over the U.S. deal of the century. The pursuit of economic diversification is clear in Kuwait's aims to augment its oil dependence through the ambitious Silk City project. Kuwait has courted Chinese investment in the duty-free business zone. However, owing to the influence of its active National Assembly, the most participatory legislature in the Gulf, the plan remains largely conceptual. Militarily, Kuwait has shown an ability to sidestep Saudi security pressures. Kuwait has continued to embrace the U.S. security umbrella to shield itself from Riyadh's orbit. Diplomatically, Kuwait prioritizes an impartial posture as it seeks to bridge the growing fissure between the blockading Gulf states and Qatar, though its shuttle diplomacy has been very active, very laudable, and perhaps, as we'll see in a couple of days, very effective. Financially, Kuwait strives to loosen the vice grip that petroleum extraction has had over its economy. Kuwait has shown how selective engagement in military coalitions, tireless mediation, and embrace of development help it hedge Saudi Arabia's zero-sum approach to the war in Yemen and confrontation with Iran. In conclusion, Oman and Kuwait frame the contours of the Gulf. Physically, they lie at its patch's way to the world, the Strait of Hormuz, and the source of its waters, the Shatt al-Arab, respectively. Ideationally, they have managed to stay above the fray of maximalist mentalities, which have led Bahrain and the UAE to bandwagon with Saudi Arabia and force Qatar to balance its blockaders with security and diplomatic measures. To be sure, for Oman and Kuwait, uncertainty in their respective leadership succession does persist as a wild card in their long-term strategies. However, so long as these transitions are smooth, it is likely that both Sultan Qaboos and Emir Sabah have fostered the necessary institutional capacity to keep their foreign policies consistent. Oman and Kuwait continue to demonstrate a proclivity for pragmatism, arbitration, and foresight. They have managed their bilateral interactions with Saudi Arabia by joining some of its initiatives without becoming beholden to them. Each state maintains an absolute gains approach in a Gulf churning with zero-sum calculations. Although the exact trajectory of their foreign policy path is uncertain, their longtime leaders have cultivated a national strategic hedging with staying power. Regardless of their future monarchs, both are likely to continue to cast core transactions, so to speak, with Saudi Arabia as they hedge their geopolitical bets. Thank you.
نشكر السيد باركر.
Thank you, Mr. Parker. You have explained the neutrality of Oman and how it distances itself from the conflict. You have also highlighted the important role of Kuwait. His Eminence Sheikh Sabah Al-Ahmad already said that this crisis cannot remain open-ended. And now I would like to give the floor to the third panelist, to the third speaker, Mrs. Noof Al-Dosari. She is a PhD student studying governance at the University of Essex. She has worked as a research and teaching assistant at the College of International Affairs Public Policy at the University of Qatar and at the Policy Assessment Department at Statecraft. She is a former research assistant. She is the author of a number of studies. Mrs. Noof will join us from through Skype.
أستاذة نوف تفضلي إذا تسمعينا. أستاذة نوف.
Thank you so much.
أستاذة نوف ممكن ترى تتكلمين بالعربي إذا حبيتي، في ترجمة فورية.
actually كتبت ورقة إنجليزية
No problem, you go ahead.
to translate it now my paper.
تفضلي.
Shall I start?
Yes, لديك عندك 15 دقيقة.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you for accepting my paper. It's my pleasure to participate in the fifth forum, Gulf Studies in our research center. My paper is about Oman's foreign policy discourse and toward Iran and the GCC regional challenges. My research paper depends on post-structuralist discursive foreign policy making literature. Therefore, my methodology will be focused on discourse theory and discourse analysis. I divided my paper into the following sections: the theoretical framework, Oman's independent foreign policy, a result of history or ideology, Oman's political ideology in three important historical shifts in the Gulf region, Oman's foreign policy discourse toward Iran, constructing the meaning of the first notable point, Iran and the threat, and Al-Bayt al-Khalij. And in the long-standing historical relationship between the two empires, we need to re-evaluate today's international relation and foreign policy making. The Sultanate of Oman has its own political ideology, which is mapping its unique relationship with Iran and with the region in general. However, Oman as a member of the Gulf Cooperation Council, it's been established after the Iranian Revolution, 1979, and during the Iran-Iraq War. One of the former reasons for establishing the GCC is to deter the Iranian threat. This goal is claimed to be the goal that all the members of the GCC want to achieve. However, Oman to have another point of view on actually what on Iran being a threat. This is quite clear when analyzing in Oman's past or since foreign policy discourse toward Iran. It serves to set that Oman's political ideology describes Iran mostly as a friend or a neighbor. And this is when we are listening to officials from Iran's, from the Omani side, they always have this word of describing Iran as a neighbor. They don't have this in their discourse as a threat or something that is going to affect the stability of the region of the Gulf Cooperation Council. This is opposite with the other Khaliji bloc, with all of the countries, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, all separate. This contradiction raises an important question about the relationship of Oman and its GCC members, which is I'm trying to question in my paper. Is really Iran a threat? And if yes, why the Iran-Omani relationship are not questioned by Gulf states? Why Saudi or other, like why are not saying to Iran, why you are dealing with Iran? Why is this pointing fingers to Qatar as the state that is responsible for not responsible, it's going to have, it's the reason for tackling insecurity in the Gulf Cooperation. they always say البيت الخليجي البيت الخليجي. فقطر في معاملتها its relationship with Iran is treating البيت الخليجي. This so-called phrase is interesting in the discourse of both those with the Iranian relationship, Oman, Qatar, Kuwait, and those who are against an Iranian relationship, Kuwait and Bahrain. I will not dive into the theoretical framework because it's too long. But what I'm trying to say is that it's noted that in Khaliji states, is having a discursive struggle over what is regarded as a threat to Gulf security, especially when it comes to defining Iran as a threat. It is thought-provoking to see that in this discursive struggle, not only the active Iranian threat is not quite clear, but also the very meaning of what Gulf state leaders call Gulf security is not clear. We are having two things that is not really clear. Iranian threat and Gulf security. So this is the concept of discursive struggle in my research argument is emphasizing that meaning does not simply exist as given. It has to be constructed through time. And Oman constructed its meaning of Gulf security through time, past until present. And Oman is in fact in a special way. Oman's symphony towards Iran is very different from its Khaliji members in Gulf Cooperation Council. So the difference between what is a threat represented Gulf states in the subjective definition, which are coming from different national political identities of Gulf states. Oman is a very good example which can stand out when looking at how a specific political identity has its own political ideology, which produces a specific meaning of what is called Iranian threat, Gulf security, and Khaliji. So in the Oman's political ideology, it's shown in three important historical shifts in the Gulf region. That is the Iranian Revolution, the Iranian-Iraq War, and the invasion of Kuwait. These three important things, also the USSR invasion of Afghanistan. So all these things showed how Oman is having a different way of dealing with Iran and the meaning of security in the Gulf. At these times, it was clearly the rise of the independent, unique Omani foreign policy ideology, and this time, and during this time, Oman approached Iran differently, and this is because, contrary to its Khaliji friends, Oman can never forget the aspect that it's been rescued by Iran during the Dhafer rebellion. This is encrypted in Omani's history, that they can never forget this, that's called, not
هاي ضريبة التكنولوجيا دائما.
So Sultan did not share his Khalid brothers' contempt toward Iran, that he did not support Saddam during his war against Iran, and this is clearly shown when Saudi Arabia leading a hegemony on the meaning of Arabism and constructing the meaning of Gulf security. So he was not emphasizing the importance of keeping a strong, he was emphasizing the importance of keeping a strong relationship with Iran. That's, to make it very simple, he was not trained to be Arabists nor Islamists, because the Omani history suffered from these things. The Imamate, the Dhafer, who used also Arabist Marxism. So Sultan Qaboos is a good, let's say, is a person who really learned from history, and he did not want to use this in his political ideology, in his foreign policy. Coming to the Strait of Hormuz, which has a very important aspect in Oman's foreign policy, showing that it has nothing to do with Arabism, but it has to do with the power of geography. And until now, I believe that one of the important aspects when you are looking at Oman's foreign policy is the aspects of Strait of Hormuz. How it is becoming, it's actually a part of Oman's foreign policy political ideology. And it was not revolved around the political ideology of Arabism, nor the political concept of an other, non-Arab. Therefore, it was difficult for him to work with Arab and Khaliji states. Sultan was kept working with bringing different proposals for the security of the Gulf in the region. I would like to jump to the other, the last part of my, just for keeping the time. And the last part of my paper is that Oman's foreign policy discourse toward Iran constructing the meaning of Iran as a threat and late Khaliji. The GCC born out of regional crisis, which made leaders constantly in a state of insecurity and suspicious towards its neighbors, especially the so-called Iranian threat. According to Al-Dosari, the first Secretary General of the Gulf Corporation, the GCC is like a surreal painting resembling a soap opera. The political scene that witnessed the formation of the GCC was built not only on different GCC threat perceptions, but also different Gulf states' political identities, which gave birth to the different political ideologies on the meaning and purpose of the GCC. And here we are saying that Oman has its own language, its own way of constructing the meaning of the GCC in the international space and regional space, not similar to that of the rest of the members of the GCC. This does not mean that Oman necessarily the only state that adopted a different political ideology toward both the GCC formation and Iran's role in the region. But it says that Oman and some other Gulf states like Kuwait and Qatar tried to stand out against Saudi and later UAE hegemony over the meaning and function of GCC. Their hegemony is characterized by wanting to control the international relations of the Arabian Gulf, and I call this in my research Khalijization. And others would say that, what do you mean by Khalijization? I would say that some Gulf countries are trying to take the Gulf Cooperation concept towards a formed a unity and towards to one type of foreign policy against a political political issue in the region. So Khalijization is not saying like Europe. It's not really. It might not be similar to urbanization because it's very different. We cannot put urbanization because Khalijization is depending on taking a specific ideology and wanting to direct the Gulf cooperation towards this specific political ideology. For example, the Yemen war, when some of the states just just one minute. So when Yemen and when UAE and Saudi led this war on Yemen, they wanted to take not just Gulf states but also other Arab states into this war by saying that this is an Arab war. And this is also one of the things that it is blurred in this Khalifization hegemony of meaning over taking one political ideology and representing others. So what did Ben Alawi said, which I liked when he in the conference, the summit of Mecca, he said after that, some Arabs went to war, and they come to, after going to war, to negotiate with us. But before going to war, they don't come to negotiate with us. And this is really showing how Oman is not really taking and Yemen war is a very excellent example. Sorry.
Thank you.
Taking too long.
Thank you. نشكر الأستاذة نوف والكل يعلم بالدور الذي تلعبه.
Thank you, Mrs. Noof. We are all aware of the role the Sultanate is playing, whether in the Gulf or in the Arab world. I will open the floor to questions and answers. We have only 15 minutes for questions and answers. Please be specific and address the question to one person, and then we can open the floor to another round of questions. Please go ahead. Thank you, Mr. Rashid Al-Nuaimi, for your moderation, and I would like to thank Dr. Dhafer for his paper. Actually, Gulf countries have spent a lot of money, and particularly the blockade countries, and I believe this money would have been more productive had they spent it on a more neutral naval force. Mr. Dhafer's model is very important. It shows that as societies and communities we are not a failed society, but the problem lies in how we are operating at the highest levels. In addition, to be frank with you, there are no future prospects for an objective security solution and settlement after the lack of trust. Saudi Arabia is responsible for this distrust, and it is the one that should address and redress this mistake. However strong the kingdom is, it should not have undermined what is left of the solidarity amongst the Arab countries. So I believe there will be no solution if the kingdom does not redress its mistake. In addition, I have a warning to make. I want to warn against this increasing rhetoric with Qatar joining or being promoted as a part of the other axis. We should redress this language, because this is justifying the mistakes of the blockade countries. So we talk about the combat ideology of the Qatari forces. I believe there should be a separation between Erdogan's positive initiative. In my opinion, the initiative has been positive, but we should separate Qatar from this initiative, and Qatar should not be thrusted with this axis. In addition, we should be pragmatic and realistic, and we should maintain the current system of GCC. The rapprochement between Turkey and Iran in Iraq and in Syria is not in our interest. We should support Oman's positive neutrality. We should promote this model. We should support bilateral relations with Turkey as one united Gulf bloc. This is the ideal solution for us. Thank you, Dr. Abdelaziz, for your comments. So he had a comment. It was not a question. I'm not sure if you have any comment as the speakers on this. Actually, I would like to comment on one point he mentioned. We always hear talk about these money. These money did not go in vain. Actually, we do not always have to explain how the money is spent and where the money goes. Like military spending is important. Aircraft maintenance is expensive. The Gulf money. So military spending is justified in all its facets. Please allow us, please allow Mr. Dhafer to answer you. So he mentioned military spending. He criticized military spending. Military spending is justified, and usually the grounds for this spending should not be explained and exposed to the people. We can say how much maintenance costs, armament, how much maintenance costs, how much upgrade costs, and so on. In addition, we hear repeated talk about the fact that that money was spent under pressure or threats or blackmail from Trump, and this is unacceptable. To be fair and honest and just, let us go back to what happened at the NATO summit a few days ago. Trump also asked the NATO to play, so it's not only about blackmail. Security costs money. In addition, Trump is also wants the farmers in Nebraska and workers in Pennsylvania to pay money. And Trump hasn't officially said this before the lawmakers at the Congress or in other official venues. These are his populist comments and remarks from Trump. So I believe we should redress this discussion. Dr. Abdullah, please go ahead. Please be specific and tell us to who do you address your question. Is it an intervention or a question? Actually, I have both, an intervention and a question. First of all, I would like to congratulate the panelists and the speakers, and I'm happy that they have more time to answer our questions. Mr. Zafi, I think you misunderstood what I said. I did not say that there is no Gulf force, but what I wanted to say is that we need a separate Gulf plan, independent of and or from and not a part of. There is an Iranian project, a Russian project, an American project, but where is the Gulf project to protect the security of our facilities and also oil water corridors? This is what I was calling for. Unfortunately, we do not have a project, and actually we do not even have an embryonic plan. In addition, we are now heading towards the internationalization or globalization of Gulf countries. The more the U.S. retrenches, we know that Trump doesn't want more energy from the Middle East, doesn't want anything from the Gulf. And Trump also questioned there is no debtor, and who will fill the vacuum today? No one will step in to fill the vacuum because there is no alternative to the U.S. But down the road, in the future decade, a few years ago, I conducted a study in Kuwait, and we said that in the next decades there will be Chinese, Indian, and Russian bases, and also bases from other countries. So, Dr. Dhafer, my question to you, is this an idea acceptable? Is the internationalization of Gulf security acceptable to you? One last point, based on what we heard from Mr. Tyler.
That with all due respect to PhD candidate students. What we heard is something we've been teaching for the last 15 years about the GCC, the disunity, the role of Kuwait, the role of Oman, why Oman practices objective neutrality, why Kuwait has its approach of mediation diplomacy. What I would recommend to the center is that it's a great idea to listen to fresh and new students becoming professors in the future, but I hope this will be a panel for PhD candidates, because you're preaching to converts, you're preaching to experts. Because of that, I would strongly recommend that all of you guys who have a PhD research dissertations should be in a one panel and discuss all these issues, because what you've been saying is that we've been teaching for the last 15 to 20 years in this part of the world. What you said is great for people who are unfamiliar with the GCC and with the intricacies of our region.
شكرا. ناخذ سؤال ثاني استاذ محمد. يا ريت بس يكون السؤال محدد عشان الوقت يا استاذ محمد. ايوه اوكي.
سؤالي للدكتور ظافر.
My question is to Dr. Dhafer.
البحرية الخليجية بصفة عامة.
What is the perception of the Gulf Naval Force? Actually, there is a dual perception. Some perceive it as a Gulf Force that is non-prestigious, like the Air Force. And you know that most rural family members join the Air Force and not the Naval Force, and therefore there is an inferior perception of the Naval Force. In addition, Gulf countries believe that Gulf armament has also a domestic dimension to protect countries from any international, domestic or internal coup. And some believe that naval forces are not important for this form of internal security. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dr. Al-Ajmi, I would like to congratulate you on your presentation. You are very active everywhere. You listed a number of Gulf naval forces from 6 Gulf countries. As you said in your presentation, this is a small bug or a swarm that is fighting or facing a bigger insect or a swarm. From the inception of the GCC, we only perceive we have one perception of risk. The Gulf Naval Force has never been used in protecting the tankers in the 1991 war or in the 1990 war, as we know, and also the Gulf Naval Force has not helped defend the Gulf in current times. Therefore, the armament is not is to no avail, and also the Gulf Naval Force is not a first trap. It's only it's not a striking force, and therefore it's a waste of money. And the Gulf countries do not have strong naval forces. In addition, France has established a naval force to protect the Gulf. As Dr. Sharji, also India will have its own naval force, and China will have its naval force to protect the tankers line. Therefore, in other words, we are accepting what is being dictated to us, and we do not get to the core issue. This is a futile waste of money, especially given our fragmentation. And in light of this, we won't have one united ideology. We need one united ideology and force. I would like to ask my question to Dr. Dhafer Al-Ajmi. He mentioned that the U.S. Did not take a stance on the missile attack. I believe that the U.S. Avoided escalation, and the U.S. did not want further escalation between Iran and Saudi Arabia. I have another open question to all. In my personal opinion, do you think that the Sultanate of Oman can take a neutral stance in relation to the relationship between the US and Iran. History, geography, and security are all factors that come into play in addition to Oman's trade and economic interests with Iran. Do you think that in light thereof, can Iran remain a neutral player between Iran and the US? Thank you, Doctor. One last question from female members of the audience.
Thank you very much for all the speeches. Betul Doğan Akkaş, Qatar University and Durham University Gulf Studies Joint Degree Program. I am a PhD student, just like my other colleagues, Noof and Tyler. Thank you very much for your presentation. First, I will start with being disagree with the gentleman behind spoken. Most of the influential conferences in the world about international relations, political science, are not done by doctors or professors, done by potential scholars, junior or senior. So I can't accept this comment for my colleague. And thank you for your presentation, the way you examined the Kuwait and Oman. My question goes to Mr. Al-Ajmi. While discussing maritime security in the Middle East, and specifically in the Gulf, why you always take the alliances with the international actors, third parties, as a threat to Gulf security? When it comes to cooperations, it's more common in the world to provide more security. So I want to ask your opinion about Turkish naval base, which is constructed in Qatar. Do you think, to what extent, the new naval base in Qatar will change the maritime security regarding the strategic and political importance of Qatar in the Gulf region? Thank you very much.
Thank you. ناخذ آخر سؤال هنا.
قيس البوسعيدي من سلطنة عمان.
تفضل الله يحفظك. سؤال دايركت مباشرة.
إن شاء الله ما يهمك. يعني كسبا للوقت قيس البوسعيدي من
قيس البوسعيدي from the Sultanate of Oman. Dr. Dhafer, you are very well versed about the Gulf maritime and naval security. What are the future impacts of this file? And also I have a question to Tyler. Oman's and Kuwait's policies are very clear. It's a policy of diplomacy to solve crisis. So this is the policy adopted, and how can this help resolve a crisis? I would like to give the floor first to Dr. Dhafer. I have a few comments to make. My friend and enemy at the same time said or asked about a potential role for Japan and India and other players. In 2001, I attended a conference hosted by Japanese, and they asked about how they could send their forces to the Arab Gulf. Actually, the people in attendance were a number of experts. I think they took heed of the opinion that it's better for them to defend the Strait of Malaga instead of coming to the Gulf. And it was and that this instead of so they took heed of this opinion. India, Japan, and China all share the same belief, and therefore they will not come to the Gulf. The Blue Water Navy is a capability. A number of frigates, carriers, and ships are reserved for such form of effort. Long-range projection, long lines, supplies, and logistics. These are all capabilities that are not available to our countries. Even China does not have enough aircraft carriers to defend itself, and let alone to reach these parts of the world. Maybe it could reach some areas 700 years ago, but it can no longer play this role now. And it's also relying on the Silk Road, and in the Silk Road is relying on other countries to defend this huge project. I do not think that these countries will access this part of the world. Of course, this will apply to the Turkish Navy's tools. ليس للأتراك مواقف أو قدرات لتكون جزءا من القوى البحرية الخليجية. Muhammad Musfir, you asked your question. Where is Muhammad? He's not here, so I'll not answer his question. I will move to the third question about the inferior perception of the naval force. Is there an inferior perception of the naval force? I don't agree. I believe there is a transformation and technological military shift. As a result of this transformation, the first reliance was on the Navy, then on the Air Force, and the Air Force gained the upper hand in the 80s and the 90s, and also towards the end of the Cold War. As a result, GCC countries adopted the same approach. I don't think it's about an inferior perception of the naval force. I believe the people of the Gulf, and first and foremost, people that loved the sea more than the desert, and their societies were based on the beaches, on the seas, more on the deserts. It's not true that there's an inferior perception or that they do not appreciate the naval force. You mentioned also the fear of coup. I do not think this is a part of the history. The Gulf armies have never played such a role in the past. This is not part of our military heritage over the past 70 years. So I do not believe that the fear of coup is the reason why the naval forces are the weakest. Usually the air forces are the ones that conduct putsch in our part of the world. The future of the naval force, actually, this depends on the players in question. Local defense or defending ourselves, these are taken for granted, and we know that we cannot do this. This is taken for granted. From the strategic dimension, when we first discovered that we cannot stand up to Persia, to the Persian countries or the Ottomans, we made this realization years ago. Back then, the strategic perspective was to rely on others. So I believe that these are the real balances that will maintain the security of the Gulf.
Thank you very much for the questions. I guess going from the last question to the first, I think of Oman and Kuwait's arbitration as sort of a diplomatic division of labor, where I think Oman is negotiating in Yemen in terms of inclusion of Ansar Allah in the internationally recognized government, and the Sultanate of Oman has been much less dedicated to resolution of the Qatar blockade. I think alternatively, Kuwait has had very little influence in terms of negotiations in Yemen. It did host UN-recognized talks in 2016, but of course they stalled. And I think that in terms of the resolution of the current crisis, I think Kuwait has been very active in terms of negotiating an opening of the border between Saudi and Qatar, also in terms of family repatriation. But I can't really predict the exact contours beyond a rapprochement with Saudi Arabia, which is going to be much more difficult to attain than Abu Dhabi. I think in terms of Oman, of course, it's Ibadi Islam, and I think the conciliatory and quite mediatory aspects of that have a great role to play. I think also just the alliances that Sultan Qaboos formed in confronting the rebellion or revolution in Dhafer, really being able to draw from those relationships with pre-revolution Iran, keeping those ties intact. Again, I just think, as many of us have said, its diplomacy is very well situated to that. And Dr. Sheji, I very much follow your work and I appreciate your work. And I respect the comment, but of course it hurt my heart a bit because I think that we've been speaking a lot about the bandwagoning, balancing dichotomy for a very long time. Correct me if I'm wrong, sir, but I think that this introduction of nuance in between those two poles, bringing in hedging, this is something that has been applied to Southeast Asian states, and it's increasingly being incorporated in. Sir, I welcome the opportunity to speak with you. I value your work, and inshallah you can help me become a better student, because again, I was invited here by the Gulf Center. They felt that this paper had very strong credentials. I gave a microscopic, both descriptive, analytical, and empirical nuance. And sir, I'll be in Kuwait in the beginning of January, and I absolutely welcome the opportunity to learn from you and to keep getting better because I don't want to let you down.
Thank you. Thank you, Barker. I think you've done well. Thank you. أشكر جميع المتحدثين في هذا.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank all the speakers of this session that clarified many things to us and taking into account the different points of view in the Gulf. I do believe that, of course, this region will always face foreign intervention and will always be also linked to foreign protection. It's very important for us all to say that the danger is imminent because this region might find it very difficult to face any other problems. Thank you very much. Thank you.